One of the things I'm going to point out real quick on this slide is that FHWA's Title VI program encompasses more than just Title VI. And sometimes when you're talking to FHWA, they will say, well, Title VI requires that we do this and this and that. And what they really mean is they're talking about their Title VI program. And that's all of the umbrella laws that they consider under Title VI. And when we're looking just at our projects, whether they regard, involve tolling or not, we kind of look to this simple sort of analytical framework. And this is just, is an EJ population present? Has there been adequate public involvement efforts? Are there any disproportionately high and adverse impacts? Is avoidance and mitigation considered? And equal treatment benefits? Because when we're looking at this, it's the effects that we want to measure. Not necessarily the population. We want to be sure that there's a distinction between that. We're looking at what are the actual effects of the project and on the low-income population in the area. And this is a slide that comes from the Department of Justice Title VI Legal Manual. And this is something that I borrowed from Mitch Batisich, who used to be FHWA's civil rights person and then moved on to be one of their environmental people and has now moved to North Carolina to work for FHWA there. And this is one of the things he said, this is the definitions of disparate impact under Title VI. Disparate treatment and intentional discrimination. Claims, and these are claims that would allege that similarly situated persons are treated differently because of their race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and then disparate indirect effects. Disparate or affects discrimination occurs when the recipient uses a facially neutral procedure, activity, or practice, criteria, or etc., has a disproportionate impact on a protected group. And so that's kind of one of the things that I thought I would put in there to go over. And this is when we're looking at EJ, and we're looking at EJ communities and neighborhoods. There's some factors that kind of come into play when we consider this. And one of them is that low-income and minority communities typically start with a much lower baseline condition. Such existing conditions we have to identify and evaluate along with expected project-related effects when analyzing adverse effects. NEPA established the definitions for significant and adverse impact assessment purposes, and these definitions are much more narrow than the interpretations of the same terms under civil rights law. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to talk to you too much about that. But what this essentially means is that we have to look at determinations of adverse effects taking into account pervasiveness, duration, frequency, magnitude, and severity of effects. Low-income and minority communities, again, almost always have a more adverse baseline condition. Impacts depend on in a certain degree to the transportation needs and values of the community. For example, a project that diminishes the mobility of people with low incomes, many of whom have lower levels of mobility at the outset, can have considerably greater effect than does a project that could reduce mobility in a community with people with higher mobility or higher incomes. I'll try to speak a little louder. There are also additional factors to consider, and one of the ones that I'm gonna skip over the first two and go to the second one because it really is what deals mostly what we look at when we're looking at tolling and environmental justice. When you're looking at a history of transportation funding in an area, it's possible that environmental justice neighborhoods may have received fewer infrastructure improvements in the history of their community than did more affluent, less ethnically diverse areas. And so, as a result, there could be fewer express facilities in these areas than elsewhere in the same community. When projects are Projects are built in these areas and their total population can be varying these physical impacts without being able to benefit from using the facility at the same rate as other values. So we need to look at both the burdens and the benefits for the EJ population. And this, when we're talking about tolling as an impact, this is what we're looking at. And there's just the prima facie, sort of what I call prima facie. It costs to drive on the lanes, and so a lot of people say, well, you know, it's going to cost to drive on this lane, and therefore anyone that doesn't have a high income or has a low income can't use them or can't benefit from them. So that's something that we have to address, that we may have to address more, you know, frequently in some areas. A user impact. The actual users of the project and those who feel the benefits and burdens of the toll lanes may reside beyond the boundaries of the immediate area of construction. So when you're looking at a user impact, you're looking not just beyond, you know, not just at the physical construction of the project, but you're also needing to come up with some way to examine who's actually using those lanes, who's going to be using those lanes, and who might be traveling. If it's an existing facility, who might be using that facility, and where are they going? Traffic diversion, or pricing strategies. Now, this reflects the fact that toll lanes are faster because they're not crowded in a lot of cases. And the way that toll lanes manage to continue to people continue to pay tolls based on the fact that traffic moves. If traffic becomes congested, then the mechanism to handle that is usually raising the toll. So over time, as the frontage roads or the arterials or other free facilities become more and more crowded and the toll rate goes up, then maybe people are not going to drive on, you know, if somebody was saying, well, I can afford to make one trip a week on the toll road, well, now, maybe I can only afford to do one a month. So that's kind of when we're talking about traffic diversion, and this is one that we've looked at on some of our other projects, but if somebody is avoiding the toll and they're now deciding to, oh, here, we're going to reach a point where this lane's going to be tolled, I'm going to get off and cut through the neighborhoods. What is the effect on the neighborhoods where people are getting off? Difference in travel time, if I can afford to pay my travel time as well. And then collection methodology. And this is one that may not be quite so obvious, but a lot of it, right now, we're doing projects that have electronic toll collection. And minority and low-income households tend to have a lower rate of credit card ownership. So if we're billing folks via the credit card and they're paying via the credit card, then that could be a barrier for some folks that they can't use the loans. There's the option of video billing, where you drive through a lane, the camera takes your picture, and you receive a bill. But in most cases, there's usually a fee associated with sending you the bill, and the toll rate is a little higher, based on the fact that there may be a discount given to anyone who has an electronic toll tag and pays electronically. So that's something that we kind of need to look at, and FHWA has asked us to discuss. Additionally, revenue use. It used to be when a toll road, toll roads came out, they were tolled, the facility was paid for, and in some cases the toll went away. And now we're seeing that toll, we need to use it for things like maintenance and upkeep on the facilities. And so there's kind of folks are saying, well, where's my toll money going? If we're taking the proceeds and we're doing other projects, which may be a mitigation strategy that we're looking at or we're using, then where are these projects located and who's going to be using them? So now we're going to talk about the joint guidance that END developed with Federal Highways. And Brandy's going to give you some information about that and talk to you about how we're using it.